Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
All right, time for some Friday Night Rugby. I'm delighted to say we've got Brian O'Driscoll with us. Brian, good evening to you. How you doing?
Good evening, Ger. How's things?
Yeah, pretty good. So one of these days we're going to stop talking about the World Cup, but it's not going to be today because luckily we've loads more material to talk about this week. Rory Best has done a series of interviews where he talked about how he felt like the players didn't take enough control in the build-up to games, contrary to what would have happened in previous years. He mentioned particularly huddles with the coaches where they were piling on detail on the day of matches, and the tension increased to the point where the players couldn't deal with it. And then David Nucifora obviously gave his media briefing to a select few journalists about what he thought was wrong and what happened. A 50-point plan, apparently, not all of which are going to be published and made public. But certainly felt like this week Joe Schmidt got thrown under the bus a little bit.
Well, I'm surprised to hear about obviously there's a need for an element of truth, and ultimately, that tends to come out. It's easier for someone like Rory to come out with the truth because there's no recriminations, he's retired, and he can be brutally honest without being scathing. I'm surprised to hear of the detail issues on the day of the game. It's pretty unusual for that in any environment to be given more detail on the actual day of a game, or in those huddle environments where what usually happens, you go into camp on Sunday, you get your detail, Sunday night, Monday, Tuesday, particularly in Joe Schmidt's environments, the expectation is for you to know it before the first session on the Monday morning, and then everything is ironed out before you leave camp on Tuesday evening, have your day off Wednesday, back in and hit the ground running Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I know that's slightly different in a World Cup aspect because you don't have those days off or get to get away. But I'm really surprised to hear that, where you'd be loading, new information on the team at short notice with the expectation for it to help with the delivery of the overall game plan. It's not very Joe Schmidt-esque, I would have thought. Yeah.
Best says what they should have done as a leadership group was say, no, stop. We've had enough now. Because he does say that at one point they intervened and it got better, but then it kind of backslid as the tournament, actually as the year went on. This seems to have been an issue in all of 2019, which would suggest that the pressure got to everybody. Like, that seems to be the one thing that we can all agree on. The pressure seems to have got to the players, and in particular to Joe, when this whole notion of getting past the quarterfinals in the World Cup became overbearing.
Well, listen, I think Joe admitted it himself. It was made reference that at least I hope he said this to public, that his wife wondered, whether he was feeling okay because he looked visibly stressed and visibly older, and I think that became very apparent as the competition went on. That since he's come back, the colour has come back to his face. So clearly there was a lot of stress and a lot of pressure being felt by him, and that manifested itself with negativity. And the thing is, Joe is someone where more is more, and that's not always the case with everybody else. People need a diversion from it. People need escapism. Whereas Joe will talk about rugby, and the more he gets to talk about it, the more in his head I think he feels as though he's covered every base going into a game. Whereas not everyone works that way. And he's obviously a strong personality. Besides being head coach, he's a strong personality, very much believes in his own principles and his own philosophies. Maybe he was just trying to reinforce them, and it was picked up it was being picked up the wrong way. And hindsight's a great thing, being able to look back. But it's difficult also from a player's perspective when he's had that level of success to question the coach. And we've covered this ground before in a slightly different way, where when you've got a coach that has delivered for Leinster for 3 seasons, where he's gone into the Irish setup and done things that we've never done before, very hard to really, to question a lot of where he's coming from, because you put so much faith in that previous success. So I guess only the senior players fully understand how much kickback they got from him, and whether he didn't pay any lip service, he only paid lip service to them or not. But yeah, it's not an ideal circumstance to find yourself in where you feel as though you're pulling in slightly different directions.
Yeah, and look, it's interesting because Joe Schmidt was obviously doing a night with Joe Malloy down in Limerick, and Alan English was tweeting about it. His first tweet was, Schmidt claims Joe Malloy has misconstrued Rory Best's comments. He doesn't appear to accept that Best actually said what most people understood him to have said. And there was another bit where, I'm just trying to find it now, where he was saying that Rory had texted him afterwards to say that he hadn't actually said that, no, it had come out in an unusual way and that it had maybe been a bit misconstrued, which kind of was what he said Issa had done as well. You just hope that at some point Joe Schmidt's listening to what Rory Best is saying and what Issa is saying and what everybody else is saying and goes, okay, well, what was the full part of my role in all this, and what would I have to do differently if I was going to be in a situation like this again?
Yeah, you would be hopeful that that will be the case, and I think you can always manufacture a rationale for why something didn't work out. But sometimes you have to listen to those, and that's why you have to give, you know, honesty and brutal honesty at times to improve performance. And obviously, from an Irish perspective, it's about improved performance in the next 4 years, but also from Joe's point of view as he's to evolve as a coach. You know, every coach has some sort of blind spot more often than not. And I'm sure Joe, possesses his own. So it's almost important to be so self-critical and self-analytical that you're able to understand it and talk to people that will give you real truths. And I think otherwise you'll have a taint, or you'll have a manipulated view as to what sort of coach you are. Whereas you need that brutal honesty, and I hope, that in those quieter conversations that he will still be getting it. It's very difficult to have it out in the masses and for us all to be pulling it apart. It's much easier for those sort of conversations to be had behind closed doors and in private, where he will be able to ask certain questions that he wouldn't ordinarily be able to ask in the public domain, and get the feedback that will necessitate him to be a better coach going forward. Yeah,
that's a very fair point, in fairness. So, like, we're pulling this apart in public. He's doing that at a public event, and no doubt there are different conversations, and look, we all prepare a face to meet the faces that we meet. But I do want to, the brutal honesty is the thing that we've kind of been talking about essentially since this happened. What do we need to do as a rugby nation, as a rugby culture, to make sure that we do something different or get a different result the next time? And that's why I'm concerned by the findings from the report this week from David Nucifora. Again, we don't know the full range of the 50 things that he's talked about, but certainly in his 27 minutes briefing with the selected journalists, he talked about the psychology, the preparedness and the backup wasn't good enough, that the skill set of the players wasn't strong enough, and there was a range of other kind of minor enough things. He was asked, who interviewed you? Like, what was your role in all this? And he was like, no, nobody interviewed me. I did the interviews with everybody, and they had another guy in to interview the players to maybe put that buffer in. But he's in coaching gear with the coaches. We look back to see pictures of Nucifora over the years, and there he is in his tracksuit alongside Joe Schmidt and Andy Farrell over the last 3 or 4 seasons. So, like, he's obviously involved with the coaches at some level, but he's not responsible for what the coaches are doing. The game plan didn't evolve. That's what we pay the coaches for, was one of the quotes. I'm like, this doesn't seem like this is going to be
the director. It's the director of rugby title, isn't it? Where you're an overall seer of things. Of course, he's not impervious to criticism. He was the one that laid it out that anything less than a semi-final will be seen as a disappointment. They were his words, and when you throw yourself in and you have more of have a part to play within the coaching environment and the setup, there's clearly a close relationship between him and Joe and some of the other coaches. Well, then you can't all of a sudden separate yourself from the criticism that's being thrown in their direction and not be part of that. So I'm surprised that Nucifora didn't, for a full holistic view on where it all went wrong and how you could change. Surely you've got to interview everyone that's been involved. And I'm surprised to hear that no one asked him any questions. I'm sure he was probably a bit taken aback when a journalist did ask him who interviewed you, and maybe it sounded like that was the first time that he'd even thought about the prospect.
Yeah, because It's a good idea. I mean, but it was definitely something that we'd been talking about the whole way through. Because if the IRFU are genuinely interested in finding out how you're going to do things differently this time from previously, you have to ask yourselves all the hard questions. You have to hold yourself to account, and you can't do that yourself. You've got to get somebody else to come and sit and say, you've got a blind spot here, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, and I think maybe you should look at this. Because that's the only way we ever learn, right?
Correct. Yeah, you do. But rugby teams are usually very good at real honesty. They are. It's an environment where you don't grow and you don't get better unless you hear some things that aren't particularly palatable. But that what it does initially is knocks the stuffing out of you, but it gives you an ability to put the building blocks in place to improve on where you were previously. So it's not new territory. It's something that we have covered in the past. In all of this as well, like, yes, we lost to the All Blacks in a quarter final, but it's not unfathomable to think that another World Cup. We've got New Zealand and South Africa in the knockout stages, but in the next World Cup, if we get a France or a Wales or an Australia, could we get to a semi-final then playing similarly to where we've been over the last few years? Yes, we can. So let's not try and reinvent the wheel as well. Just because we failed again doesn't mean we have to go back to all the other failures. And you have to take the failure of this one in isolation and realize that yes, it's a cross we're having to bear for another 4 years. But let's not let it own us when we do come to it. Let's just try and focus on getting to a quarter final, and then it's the biggest game of your life again.
Yeah. And look, I totally buy that. I guess it's this week that we have got the report where the player's skill set wasn't good enough, the psychological support around the team wasn't good enough, and you're like, okay, maybe we're missing something else here. Like the guy who's job it is.
On the skill set, I agree. I think we talked about it after the World Cup. I think we got a passing masterclass from the All Blacks in the quarter final, where I don't think that we're at that level. And we talked about that being a need for systemic change, for underage coaching, for the quality of coaching. That is a longer term vision to make us better in 15, 20 years time, as well as 4 years time. But we are, from a skill level point of view, we're probably across the board. Are we the third or fourth most skillful team? I would probably say, yeah. You look at Wales, phenomenally skillful team, great pass to the ball. England are vastly improved. France, very skillful. So I think we're probably, third, fourth in Six Nations. So it is absolutely an area that we need to improve on, and our ability to pass and offload and evolve our game and get comfortable with all of that. And it comes back to that saying, Stuart Lancaster, can't even think of it, in chaos,
comfortable in chaos.
Comfortable in chaos, even. That we've got to get to that space again, and more regularly. And the longer we're able to do that, the better we will get, and the more we'll evolve as a team.
Yeah, okay. So there's definitely beneficial stuff. The not being psychologically prepared to deal with the trauma of the tournament. I think that's all part of this whole thing. It's now become our Mount Everest, our white whale. We will talk about this endlessly. The quarter-final is actually the only thing we're gonna ever talk about until we're all dead, until we actually win one of them. So, look, whoever is going to be the next sports psychologist with the Irish rugby team, that person needs to be paid a lot of money, basically.
Yeah, we should have sympathy with how the people of Mayo are feeling, I suppose. Yeah, we're...
they were cursed.
In 4 years' time, we are going to have this conference. This is going to be coming again.
Yeah.
It's coming down the line, so expect it. And how do we deal with it? What slight modifications do we make to the processes that we put in place to try and just go that one step further? And you'll need a little bit of luck, and you'll try and need the best route, and you'll need a France like Wales got that do something crazy. Maybe we just need a bit of a break to get in, because I am a firm believer, a bit like the All Black victory, that when you break the seal, the next one will not take as long, for sure. So it's just a matter of getting to that position again, and trying to just play a little bit better, play to the standards that you've set previously, and hopefully that will be enough. But I don't think you have to go and scrutinize every last sinew of what you've done. I think it's quite simple. We'll hopefully get to a semi or a quarter final again, and then the game of your lives, and the pressure valve is released.
Briefly, to talk about some of the fixtures this weekend, the back-to-backs are kind of the most exciting part of this whole tournament because a whole season hinges on what happens, and frequently we've seen teams annihilate their opponents on a Saturday and the following week to lose it's not unheard of at all. I think it was 3 seasons ago.
Northampton.
Exactly.
4 years ago, we beat them out the gate, had a bonus point try before half-time. One of the best Leinster performances that I was involved in, and psychologically, I did an interview with Dylan Hartley during the week, and he was talking about that, and he said that the coaching staff that second week didn't say anything. They did no coaching. They just left it to them. And it just shows what a bit of mental aptitude and mental focus and how important that psychology of the game is to the success of a Saturday afternoon fixture. And from being absolutely pulled apart, I remember in that game, chasing a kick and having my ankles clipped from behind me from George North, who was playing in the centre, and I kind of looked up and I was flabbergasted because that is the most George North thing that I've ever come across. Whereas they obviously were properly hurting. So you have the scope for that to happen in these back-to-back fixtures, which makes them mouth-watering.
Complacency was the other team of the week from Rory Best. Were you guys complacent that second week in any way?
A bit. I think when you get home and you've had a big victory, I think human instinct, no matter how much you convince one another that you need to, you really need to still perform well. I think there was a combination of things. We were a bit off the pace and they were very, very good. That said, we nearly won the game at the death, but then coughed up a losing bonus point by going the length of the pitch to score a try down the other end. That was the difference between us getting a home quarterfinal and having to go out to Toulon, who we lost in the quarterfinal. So those margins in games where picking up points when it's not going for you, it's so vitally important that you don't cough up easy points or lose bonus points. Because it comes back to bite you on the backside. That's
why it's such a great tournament. It is like the last 2 minutes of what looks like a meaningless encounter, or the last 2 minutes look like they might be meaningless because that can happen all of a sudden. It has repercussions all the way through to March and April. A brief word about Munster against Saracens. When Saracens were telling us they weren't really into this competition earlier on in the year, I never really bought it because it's a chance for them to win a trophy and they're all serial winners. So of course, first day out they weren't great. Second day out they were pretty good, and they're going to be pretty good this weekend.
Yeah, like looking at their team, they've left George, the Vunipolas, Farrell, Elliot Daly. Like none of those are there. Mario Toji's really the only one that's in the mix, which is a disappointment from the competition's perspective. Terrific from Munster's because they need to win that. Obviously, drew their previous home game to Racing. You've got to win this one if you're looking at qualification. But to that point about the bonus point that they got in injury time against Ospreys, in round 6, you can be sure that will have a huge impact on their overall qualification out of this very tight pool. Because even if they do manage to win this week, no matter what Saracens team plays in Allianz Park next week, it'll be a super hard game for Munster. So they need to get 4 points from this one and ideally deny Saracens anything and kind of take the wind out of their European sails.
One last thing, the talk of an Irish and British league, a Lions League, has resurfaced over the course of the last week. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I suppose as a big advocate for European rugby, I guess I'd be a bit nervous that it has the potential to take a bit away from that. Maybe that won't be the case. But for the survival and for the improvement of our domestic league, I think it has to be a good thing. You look at Leinster at the moment, where the quality of their squad, of how they're able to go and send the second string to the likes of Glasgow last weekend and get a victory, shows that there's still holes in the Pro 14, and I think we won't get full respect from the English clubs until we have consistency of physicality in our games. There's a real sense that we're able to cherry pick the games we want to and still qualify for Europe. And, the domestic league is kind of a real second string league to us, whereas their Premiership, and certainly with the top 14 as well, they're very much considered grade A competitions. They do not think that of the Pro 14, and I'd have to agree with them. Even Irish players that have played Pro 14 and go on and play Premiership talk about how much a dogfight, how much of a slogfest it is over there, and how tough and physical it is week in, week out. So if we can get a more competitive domestic league, I think it'll serve us well, but it'll mean we're going to need bigger squads as well. So yeah, lots to play out in that, but it's, you know, I can see for and against.
All right, good stuff, Brian. Thanks a million. Cheers. Enjoy the weekend.
Yeah, take it easy. Bye.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.